Imagine waking up to headlines saying the U.S. president just threatened military action against Nigeria, not for oil, not for politics, but for faith. And just hours later, Barack Obama steps on stage, trying to make light of the chaos, only to humiliate himself in front of millions. What's going on here? Why is Trump issuing fatal warnings? And why does Obama still believe people are listening? Today, we'll unpack it all, from the persecution of Christians in Nigeria to the breakdown of U.S. leadership, the global ripple effects, and the cultural unraveling happening right before our eyes. Let's start with what set everything in motion. President Trump posted on Truth Social, and if you've been following him there, you know he doesn't mince words. This time, though, it wasn't just bold. It was stark. He said that if Nigeria continues to allow Christians to be killed, the United States would immediately stop all aid. And then he went further. He said we may very well go into that country, quote, guns blazing. He instructed the Department of War to prepare for possible action. He told the Nigerian government they better move fast. Now, whether you support Trump or not, that's a statement that stops you cold. Because it's rare, vanishingly rare, for an American president to publicly threaten military intervention over religious persecution. We've seen it for terrorism, for weapons of mass destruction, for geopolitical chess games. But for faith, for the systematic killing of believers, that's new territory. And it raises a question we should all be asking ourselves. What triggered this? The answer isn't pretty. For years now, Christians in Nigeria have faced horrific violence. We're talking about entire villages burned to the ground, churches attacked during Sunday services, families massacred in their homes. The numbers are staggering. Estimates run into the thousands of deaths annually. Some organizations, and I want to be careful here because the exact figures vary, some say between 5,000 and 10,000 Christians are killed each year in that region. Others say it's even higher. There's a group called Open Doors International. They track religious persecution worldwide. And every year, they publish a list of the most dangerous places on earth to be a Christian. The top spots: North Korea, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Nigeria, ranks disturbingly high on that list too. What these places have in common isn't poverty. It's not lack of education. It's something darker. It's either complete chaos, where armed groups terrorize with impunity, or total control, where authoritarian regimes crush anyone who doesn't conform. Now here's where it gets interesting, or frustrating, depending on how you look at it. During his first term, President Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern because of this violence. That designation isn't symbolic. It triggers a set of diplomatic and economic consequences. It puts pressure on governments to act. And you know what? It actually worked. Reports showed that the killings slowed down. Not stopped, but slowed. The international attention mattered. Then came the Biden administration. And one of the first things they did, they removed that designation. They claimed the violence wasn't really about religion. They said it was about land disputes, about climate change driving farmers and herders into conflict. They framed it as an economic issue, not a moral one. Let that sink in for a second. Thousands of people are being killed because of their faith, and the official response was to say, no, it's about the weather. Now, I'm not here to tell you climate change isn't real or doesn't matter. But when you're trying to explain away a genocide, and some experts do use that word by pointing to rainfall patterns, you've lost the plot. You've replaced moral clarity with bureaucratic cowardice. And that's what Trump was calling out. Not the complexity of the situation, but the refusal to name it for what it is. So why does Nigeria matter? Why should we, sitting comfortably in our homes here in America, care about what's happening half a world away? Because silence is consent. Because when we ignore atrocities, we become complicit in them. And because the same forces that drive persecution abroad, fear, tribalism, the urge to dominate, exist here too. Maybe they're quieter, maybe they're dressed up in nicer language, but they're here. Open Doors identifies two main drivers of persecution: chaos and control. Chaos is what happens when governments collapse, when terror groups fill the vacuum, when organized crime runs wild. Somalia, Yemen, these are places where no one's really in charge. and the most violent voices rise to the top. Control, on the other hand, is what happens when someone is very much in charge. When a regime decides that unity means uniformity, that disagreement is treason, that faith must bow to the state. Think about that second one for a moment. Control, authoritarianism, the pressure to conform or be crushed. Does any of that sound familiar? I'm not saying we're living under a dictatorship, but I am saying we've seen, in recent years, a growing intolerance for dissent, a willingness to silence voices, to deplatform, to cancel, not with violence, thank God, but with social and economic pressure, with reputation destruction, with the quiet message that if you don't fall in line, you'll pay the price. It's not the same as Nigeria. Not even close. But it's on the same spectrum. And once you start down that road, it's hard to turn back. Now, here's something I didn't expect, and maybe you didn't either. Nicki Minaj, yes, the rapper, the pop star, someone you wouldn't necessarily associate with political commentary, she came out and publicly supported Trump's post. She wrote on social media that reading his statement made her feel a deep sense of gratitude. She said, "We live in a country where we can freely worship God, and that no group should ever be persecuted for practicing their religion." She said, "Numerous countries around the world are affected by this horror, and it's dangerous to pretend we don't notice." She thanked the president and his team for taking it seriously. And then she said, "God bless every persecuted Christian." I found that remarkable. Not because Nicki Minaj isn't thoughtful, I'm sure she is, but because it's a reminder that truth doesn't belong to any one tribe. Moral clarity can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes someone outside the usual political machinery to say what needs to be said, without all the hedging and calculation. And you know what? That's how it should be. Truth shouldn't be a partisan issue. Defending innocent people shouldn't be a left-right thing. It should just be a human thing. But we've gotten so caught up in picking sides that we've forgotten how to pick principles. Let us shift gears for a moment. Because while all of this is unfolding internationally, there's a crisis brewing right here at home. And it's hitting people where it hurts most in their ability to feed their families. The government shutdown, I've mentioned it countless times, has been dragging on for over a month. And one of the casualties is the SNAP program. I won't go too much into detail since I've already mentioned this in previous videos, but somewhere between 40 and 45 million Americans rely on that program. And because of the shutdown, their benefits didn't come through on time. Think about that. You're a single mom working 2 jobs, or you're a retiree on a fixed income, or you're someone who's hit a rough patch and just needs a little help to get back on your feet. And suddenly the money you were counting on to buy groceries just doesn't show up. Federal judges stepped in and ordered the Trump administration to release emergency funds to cover the gap. And Trump responded by saying his lawyers are looking into it, trying to get clarification, because it's not entirely clear where that money is supposed to come from. There's a legal question here about whether a court can order the executive branch to spend money that Congress hasn't appropriated. It's complicated. But here's what's not complicated. People are hungry. And while Washington argues about procedure, families are lining up at food banks. Now, some people have responded by pointing fingers at billionaires. They say Jeff Bezos and the Walton family are worth hundreds of billions of dollars combined. Their employees are on food stamps. Why don't they just pay people a living wage and solve the problem? And look, I get the frustration. I really do. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding here that we need to clear up. Because when someone says a person is worth, say, $300 billion, they don't mean that person has $300 billion sitting in a bank account. They mean that if you added up the value of all the companies they own, all the real estate, all the investments, that's what it would theoretically be worth. But you can't spend it. It's not liquid. It's tied up in assets that employ people, that generate value, that drive the economy. Could they sell some of those assets and convert them to cash? Sure. But the act of selling would crash the value. And even if they did, it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Because here's the real issue. It's not the CEO's job to manage their employees' personal finances. A company can pay a fair wage, and they should. But if someone's living above their means, buying things they can't afford, making poor financial decisions. No amount of raises will fix that. And yes, there are people who are struggling through no fault of their own. I'm not dismissing that. But there are also people who abuse the system, who never learn financial discipline, who expect someone else to bail them out over and over again. And when we pretend that billionaires can just write a check and solve poverty, we're avoiding the harder conversation about financial literacy, personal responsibility, and the role government plays in either empowering people or keeping them dependent. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the dysfunction is spreading. Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana gave an interview where he compared Congress to kids fighting in the back of a minivan. He said it's not a good look, and he's right. It's embarrassing. The rest of the world is watching, and what they're seeing is a superpower that can't even keep its own government running. And the consequences are real. At major airports across the country, Houston, Boston, New York, flights are being delayed because air traffic controllers are calling out sick. These are people who've been working for over a month without pay. They're stressed, they're exhausted, and some of them have just stopped showing up. The FAA says nearly 13,000 controllers are affected. At some facilities, absence rates are pushing 70 or 80%. That means fewer people managing the skies, which means flights have to be spaced further apart, which means delays, which means a guy trying to get to his daughter's wedding or a woman rushing to see her sick mother in the hospital is stuck in a terminal, helpless, while Congress plays games. And then, just to add insult to injury, 2 planes nearly collided on the tarmac at LaGuardia. One clipped the tail of the other. Nobody was hurt, but it's a warning sign. When you push a system to its breaking point, eventually something breaks. And when it comes to aviation, we can't afford that. The FAA insists it's still safe to fly. And maybe it is, but how long can that last? This is what Senator Kennedy meant. This is the embarrassment. Not just that the government is shut down, but that the people in charge seem more interested in scoring political points than in solving the problem. And the folks paying the price? It's not the politicians. It's the air traffic controller who can't pay rent. It's the family that can't afford groceries. It's you and me, watching the circus and wondering when the adults are going to show up. But here's the thing, and this is important. The longer this goes on, the more dangerous it gets. Not just logistically, morally. Because when people lose faith in institutions, they don't just get cynical, they get desperate. And desperate people make desperate choices. They turn to extremes. They stop believing in the system altogether. And that's when things really start to fall apart. So where does that leave us? Well, while all of this is happening, Barack Obama decided to make a public appearance. He showed up at a rally in Virginia, stumping for a candidate named Abigail Spanberger. And you'd think, given everything we've just talked about, that he'd use the moment to call for unity, to remind people why we're supposed to be better than this, to offer some kind of vision that rises above the noise. But that's not what happened. Instead, he spent his time mocking Trump. He made jokes about AI-generated videos. He talked about gold-plating the Oval Office and building a $300 million ballroom. He tried to paint a picture of a president disconnected from reality, obsessed with spectacle, while the country burns. And the crowd laughed, they applauded, they ate it up. But here's what struck me, and I think you'll feel it too if you really listen to what he was saying. There was no substance. There was no policy. There was no acknowledgement of the real pain people are feeling. It was all performance, all theater, and beneath the humor, you could hear something else, something better. It wasn't the voice of a leader trying to build something. It was the voice of someone trying to tear something down, and not because he had something better to offer, but because he couldn't stand that someone else was in the spotlight. That's not leadership. That's ego. And when you lead with ego, you don't inspire people, you divide them. Now, I want to be fair. Obama's a smart guy, he's charismatic, and there was a time when his message of hope resonated with millions. But something's changed. And I think it started long before Trump came along. It started when the Democratic Party stopped talking about ideas and started talking about identity. When they stopped asking, how do we make life better for everyone? And started asking, How do we make the other side look worse? And once you go down that road, you lose the ability to be credible. Because people can tell when you're more interested in winning than in being right. Obama talked about Trump's weird videos of him flying a fighter jet and dumping things on protesters. He mocked the over-the-top rhetoric, the fabricated conspiracies. He said it's all designed to distract us from the fact that our situation hasn't gotten better. And you know what? He's half right. There is a lot of noise, there is a lot of distraction, and yes, some of it comes from Trump's side. But here's the other half. If it's such a distraction, why is Obama talking about it? If it's not worth paying attention to, why build an entire speech around it? Because if you're truly confident in your message, if you're truly focused on solutions, you don't waste time dunking on your opponent's memes. You talk about what you're going to do differently, you present a vision, you offer hope. But that's not what we got. What we got was mockery masquerading as substance. And the problem with that strategy is that it only works on people who already agree with you. Everyone else sees right through it. And that brings us to the deeper pattern here. The thing that's driving all of this dysfunction, all of this bitterness, all of this noise, it's not policy disagreement. It's not even ideological difference. Those things are healthy. Those things are necessary in a democracy. What we're dealing with is something much more personal. It's hatred, plain and simple. Nancy Pelosi gave an interview around the same time, and when someone walked by carrying a photo of President Trump, she reacted like she'd just seen something vile. She called him the worst president for children in American history. She said he's dangerous. She said he's failed them on feeding, on healthcare, on safety, on economic security, on housing, on everything. Now, you can disagree with Trump's policies, you can think he's wrong, you can vote against him. That's all fair game. But when you're her age, when you've been in politics for decades, when you've seen real tyrants and real threats, and you get that visibly angry at just seeing a photograph, that's not principled opposition, that's personal animosity. And here's why that matters. When you hate someone, you stop thinking clearly, you stop being able to evaluate them fairly, every decision they make is suspect, every word they say is malicious. You can't give them credit when they're right, because acknowledging that would feel like betrayal. And that's poison, not just for the person feeling it, but for everyone around them. Because hatred clouds judgment. It makes you reactive instead of strategic. It makes you focus on destroying the other side instead of building something better. And it spreads, like a contagion, until entire political movements become defined not by what they're for, but by what they're against. And that's where we are right now. We're in a moment where too many of our leaders on both sides, let's be honest, are driven more by ego and resentment than by service and vision. Obama's speech wasn't about helping Virginians, it was about settling scores. Pelosi's reaction wasn't about protecting children, it was about venting frustration. And the saddest part? The people who need leadership the most are the ones being ignored. The air traffic controller who hasn't been paid, the mom who can't afford groceries, the family in Nigeria who's lost everything. They don't care about your grievances. They care about solutions. Now, let's zoom out for a second, because there's a bigger picture here that we need to see. Trump's warning to Nigeria isn't just about one country. It's a metaphor for the choice America faces right now. Do we stand up for what's right, even when it's unpopular? Even when it's complicated? Even when it costs us something? Or do we retreat into comfort and silence? Do we explain away evil because confronting it is too hard? Do we let political convenience override moral clarity? There's a guy named Andrew Schultz, he's a comedian, pretty sharp, and he had a conversation recently with Charlemagne the God about all of this. They were talking about that AI video Obama referenced, the one with Trump supposedly flying a jet and doing ridiculous things. And Andrew made a point that really stuck with me. He said, Trump has a gift. He's funny. And because he's funny, he gets away with things that other politicians can't. It's authentic. It's him. You can't fake that kind of charisma. But then Andrew said something even more important. He said when other politicians try to copy that style, when they try to own people on social media, when they try to be snarky and clever, it doesn't work. It comes across as cringe, as try-hard, as fake, And that's exactly right. Because authenticity is the one thing you can't manufacture. You either have it or you don't. And Trump, whatever else you think about him, has it in spades. He says offensive things. He hurts feelings. He breaks norms. But people know he means it. They know it's really him. Compare that to the carefully focus grouped, poll-tested, consultant-approved messaging we get from most politicians. Every word calculated, every gesture rehearsed. It's why so many people feel disconnected from their leaders, because they don't feel real. Now, I'm not saying authenticity is a free pass. I'm not saying you should be offensive just for the sake of it. But I am saying there's something deeply valuable about leaders who speak plainly, who say what they think, who don't hide behind euphemisms and spin. And that's what made Trump's statement about Nigeria so striking. He didn't say, "We're deeply concerned and are exploring a range of options in coordination with our international partners." He said, "Stop killing Christians, or we're coming in, guns blazing." Is that diplomatic? No. Is it reckless? Maybe. But is it clear? Absolutely. And in a world drowning in doublespeak, clarity is a gift. But clarity without wisdom is just noise. And that's the tension we're living in. We have a president who's willing to call things by their name, who's willing to threaten consequences, who's willing to stand up for the persecuted. That's good. But we also have a political class that's so busy fighting him that they can't see past their own resentment. They'd rather mock his methods than acknowledge his point. That's bad. And caught in the middle are all the people who just want the system to work, who want their government to function, who want leaders who care more about them than about scoring points. Let's talk about what happens if nothing changes, if the shutdown drags on, if the dysfunction continues, if the hatred deepens. We've already seen flight delays. We've seen SNAP benefits disrupted. We've seen federal workers going weeks without pay. But those are just symptoms. The deeper danger is societal. When people lose faith in institutions, they don't just get cynical. They stop participating. They stop voting. They stop believing that their voice matters. And when enough people check out, democracy doesn't just weaken, it collapses. Because democracy requires participation. It requires trust. Not blind trust, healthy skepticism is good, but basic trust that the system, however flawed, is trying to work toward the common good. And right now, that trust is eroding fast. You see it in the polls. You see it in the anger. You see it in the way people talk about their own government, not as ours, but as theirs, as something foreign, something hostile. And once that divide opens, it's incredibly hard to close. So what's the answer? I think it starts with something simple, something we've lost sight of in all the noise. Principles over personalities. It doesn't matter if you like Trump or hate him. It doesn't matter if you think Obama was great or think he was a disaster. What matters is whether the policies are sound, whether the actions are just, whether the results are good. And we've gotten so caught up in personalities that we've forgotten how to evaluate principles. Take the Nigeria situation. The question isn't, do you like Trump? The question is, should America use its power to stop the mass killing of innocent people? If the answer is yes, then Trump's warning is justified. If the answer is no, then say that. Say you don't think it's our responsibility. Say you think intervention does more harm than good. But don't dodge the question by mocking the messenger. Take the SNAP benefits. The question isn't, do you blame Trump or blame Democrats? The question is, should we have a system where people can rely on the help they're promised? And if not, what do we fix? If you think the program is broken, propose reforms. If you think it's essential, fight to fund it properly. But don't just point fingers and pretend that's a solution. This is what I mean by rising above tribalism. It's not about being neutral. It's not about pretending there aren't real differences. It's about refusing to let hatred and ego drive the conversation. It's about asking, what's true, what's right, what works, and following the answers wherever they lead, even if it means agreeing with someone you don't like. And here's the thing. You have more power than you think. You can't control what politicians do. You can't make Congress pass a budget. You can't force Obama to stop being bitter or Pelosi to let go of her anger. But you can control how you respond. You can control what you share, what you amplify, what you reward with your attention. If you're tired of the circus, stop buying tickets. If you're tired of the noise, stop amplifying it. If you're tired of leaders who care more about themselves than about you, stop defending them just because they're on your team. Because here's the truth. The fight for moral clarity doesn't start in Washington. It starts in your living room, in your conversations, in the choices you make every day about what you'll tolerate and what you won't. It starts when you decide that truth matters more than loyalty, that principles matter more than personalities, that doing what's right is more important than winning the argument. And it spreads, one person at a time, one conversation at a time, until enough people refuse to play the game, and the game has to change. So let's bring this home. Trump issued a warning to Nigeria. Whether he follows through, whether it works, whether it's wise, those are all open questions. But the warning itself was a statement. It said, we see you, we know what you're doing, and we're not going to pretend it's okay. And that matters, because silence is complicity, because when evil is ignored, it grows, because someone has to be willing to say, this stops now. At the same time, we're watching our own country struggle, not with genocide, not with mass persecution, but with something subtler and maybe more insidious, a breakdown of trust, a collapse of leadership, a culture where hatred masquerades as righteousness and ego masquerades as principle. And that struggle is just as important, because if we lose the ability to govern ourselves, if we lose the ability to work together, if we lose the ability to distinguish between what's true and what's convenient, then all the power in the world won't save us. If you found value in this conversation, share it with someone, because these ideas need to be spread. Because the more people who start thinking in terms of principles instead of personalities, the more people who start demanding substance instead of spectacle, the harder it becomes for the circus to continue. Hit that like button so this reaches more people. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And most importantly, tell me in the comments, would you support the president taking action to stop Christian persecution abroad? Or do you think America should stay out of it? Because this conversation isn't just about politics. It's about who we are as a people. It's about what we stand for. It's about whether we're still capable of defending the defenseless, even when it's hard, even when it's complicated, even when it costs us something. I don't have all the answers. I'm not claiming to. But I know this much. Silence is not wisdom, neutrality is not virtue, and comfort is not peace. Real peace comes from doing what's right, even when it's difficult, from standing up, even when it's easier to sit down, from speaking truth, even when it's unpopular. And if we want leaders who do that, we have to start by doing it ourselves. So let's do it together. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.